Family and supporters of the detained WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange are refusing to give up their fight to stop his extradition to the U.S., despite losing another legal appeal in a London court recently. Assange's wife Stella and children were granted a private audience with the Pope at the Vatican on Friday as she leads the campaign for her husband's release. She has exhausted virtually all legal avenues of appeal. Assange is wanted by U.S. authorities on 18 criminal counts after WikiLeaks published thousands of classified documents and diplomatic cables in 2010 and 2011. His supporters see his prosecution as a politically motivated assault on journalism and free speech. Washington says the release of the documents puts lives in danger. So why hasn't the U.S. dropped the charges, and what will this mean for other journalists? To answer these questions, we've reached Glenn Greenwald. He's an independent journalist and the host of System Update on Rumble. We've reached him in Rio. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of people have been urging the U.S. to drop the charges against Julian Assange, and recently even the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, said there is no point in this continued prosecution. So why hasn't the U.S. dropped these charges?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Literally every major press freedom and civil liberties group in the West, often which agree on very little, have united to urge the Biden administration to do so on the grounds it's the gravest threat to press freedom in the West. The history of the U.S. security state, the CIA and the NSA and Homeland Security is very much that if somebody exposes their secrets, even when those secrets are evidence of crimes or other deceit and corruption, as was the case here, they want to punish the person to the fullest extent, to really destroy them, mostly as an example to warn others that if they discover evidence of criminality and are thinking about doing the same thing, their lives will also be destroyed. So I think letting Julian be free, even though he spent almost a decade in captivity of various forms, would be just simply too much for them from that perspective.
Now, the U.S. is saying that Assange put many people's lives at risk by publishing the leaked documents. What do you think of that argument?
I would challenge anybody who believes that to identify even a single person that has ever been put in harm's way as a result of these publications. This is what the U.S. government says in every instance where someone comes forward and blows the whistle on their conduct. They said that about the great Pentagon Papers whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, who just recently passed away. They said that about my source, Edward Snowden, when he gave us the material to report on the NSA that won the Pulitzer Prize. They say it in every instance, and yet when pressed on specifics, they can never claim who it was who's harmed, because the reality, the only people who are harmed from these kind of revelations are the people in power whose crimes have been exposed. It wasn't like the names of any covert agents got exposed or anything like that. WikiLeaks has always been very careful with the information it releases. They worked with the New York Times and the Guardian to do it. So it's just a way of trying to demonize people who expose their corruption and their deceit.
So by prosecuting Assange under the Espionage Act, what message is the U.S. sending to journalists around the world?
It's interesting, when the indictment was first unveiled under the Trump administration, I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post warning that this would put investigative journalists at risk all over the world. 2 months later, I was contacted by a source who enabled me to do some extremely earth-shattering reporting here in Brazil that led to the release from prison of the current president, Lula da Silva. And when Brazilian prosecutors tried to prosecute me for that reporting unsuccessfully, they used the template that the United States was using against Assange, because the theory is that if you work with your source to help them avoid detection, or you encourage them to get additional information, which every good journalist not only will do, but has to do, should do, that's your ethical obligation, they're trying to criminalize the heart of investigative journalism. And that's why even people who dislike Assange politically are so concerned about the press freedom implications of this prosecution.
Now, does it make a difference that some people may not view Assange as a journalist? They might view him as either a troublemaker or someone who deals in stolen or illegal documents. In your view, does he qualify as a journalist?
Well, I would hope that all journalists on some level are troublemakers. That's kind of our job, is to create problems for people in power by telling the public things they want to hide. And some of the best reporting, in fact, if you pick up the New York Times, the Washington Post, if you listen to the CBC, if you read the Guardian or the BBC, Every day, there's information that is in some way stolen. Sources come forward and give us classified information that the government says that's the stuff of investigative reporting. So if somebody now becomes a quote unquote non-journalist because their source has taken information and given it to them against the law, that means most journalists are now non-journalists. And that's the reason why this precedent would be so threatening. And the other thing I would say is, the Constitution of the United States protects not a special class of people called journalists, it protects the act of journalism. You know, back when the Constitution was enacted, ordinary citizens like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine, they weren't professional journalists. They were using the printing press to warn against the abuses of the British Crown. It's the activity of journalism that is protected, not a special privileged group of people called journalists.
And before we go, you've gotten to know Julian Assange over the years. How would you describe his current mood and how's he holding out?
You know, his own doctors have said that he is on the verge of both physical and mental collapse after all this time. Remember, before he even went to prison, he spent 8 years inside the Ecuadorian embassy where he had asylum because the Ecuadorians feared the U.S. would try to do this. He hadn't seen sunlight. He hadn't gone outside. And the prison he's in is no joke. It's called the British Guantanamo. It's where they put terrorism convicts and the like. And so, of course, after all this time, it's taken a remarkable toll on both his physical and mental health. They're very worried that if he is transferred to the United States, he won't even survive.
Well, we really appreciate you spending some time with us today. Glenn Greenwald in Rio, thank you very much.
Thank you for covering this, and thank you for having me.